Oh, you got it. You got it. Oh, Stella. Yeah, you don't say that.
I don't think that looks like it. Oh man.
It's a power on you. Just power on you.
Okay. Welcome back. Let's continue on with where we were. Remember earlier we had that empty repository? So let's go ahead and take a look at what we did, and let's make sure we save our code, because right now if my hard drive crashed, everything we just did would be gone. So how do we prevent that from happening? How do we put it up there and back it up and save a revision? We do git add, but we have to be sure we're in the right place. We have to be in the same root directory as that little special .git database, that little folder, that directory. So how do we get there? We named it day 6. So how do we go down? CD. Yep. So now we can see that we moved into there, and okay. So we have our code in here. So I'm going to let's do the git command together. What's the next one? This is whatever message we want. So okay, press enter. And now what's the, at this point, where is our code?
Still on your hard drive.
Still on our hard drive, but if we do a git log, we're going to see it knows that we've made a commit. And it's given, see this crazy long number? That's a unique identifier. That's what we use if we ever want to roll back our code to that point in time. That's a milestone. We can use that in the future if we ever want to get back to that point. That's why you do commits. The more frequent your commits, the more granular your revision history. So now, we're going to put it up there because our whole point was day 6, right here, you can actually see there's nothing out there. It's like, okay, GitHub knows you haven't done anything yet. So let's go back up here and give it some code. How do we tell it, here you go, GitHub.
Push origin.
There we go. And as soon as that's done, it says, oh, you don't have anything. I'm going to go ahead and create what you need over there. Go back over here to GitHub. Refresh. And voila. There's our code.
I have a question for you concerning Git and GitHub. Earlier you said that you can see the different iterations and the different commits.
Yes.
And the comments that are with it. Can you show us how to do that? So if we do maybe a second iteration, and will it tell you where the changes were as well?
Yeah. So Scott is asking, you know, it's all well and good that we're sharing this up there, but it would be nice for you to prove to us that you're not lying to us. So let's go over here. And let's go, I think on the first couple days, there was this classmates repository. And let's go in here. We've got 97 commits. And let's go, who doesn't mind me looking at their personal stuff? Not sure it's up there, but we'll see if it's up there. So there's Aaron Lowe, he raised his hand. So if I want to see, did you have more than one commit? Okay, so let's go in here. I'm going to click on the file, and it's actually going to pull up the file if I click on it. And this is, yeah, there's nothing in there except if you have multiples. Actually, let's do it with our own repository. So we've had one commit so far. We want to see, show me that it keeps track of the changes. As a matter of fact, I did this one yesterday in preparation for today. But I only had one commit, so it's not going to be of very much use. I know where we can see one on our course content. So I'm finding a repository. What I'm doing, I'm poking around trying to find repository. It's like, okay, I've got 48 commits. And each time, it's like, okay, this is the message that you added. And this is a good example of, this is kind of what developers put in there when nobody else is watching. It's like very simple, very concise, sometimes not enough detail. Challenge solutions for day 5. What files did I change? I don't know. Let's go find out. I'm going to click on that. And here is what Scott wanted to see. Show me the before and after. The red and the minus means it was deleted, and the green and the plus means it was added. And it goes file by file. So each box is a file, and it tells you the file path right there. So this is, I added all this stuff to that file. It didn't exist before, in other words. Now, it is useful to say, okay, browse all the files at that point in time. So this is like, go back in time, show me exactly the way everything was right then. It allows you to do that right there. Okay, did that answer your question?
It does. What's the one branch? Is that just other repositories it connects to?
One branch is going to be master. Now, if Harper, I'm going to ask you to go over branching and merging. I will very quickly explain the concept, but Harper actually walked Richmond through it, I believe, on day 1, maybe when we weren't on the stream. What it allows you to do is say, whatever it is right now, I want to make an entire copy, diverge, and I'm going to go work on something, and I'm going to give that a name. It's not master anymore. I'm going to give it my feature branch or whatever. It says, because Git keeps track of all the changes at any point in time, it will say, whatever it was, I'm going to make kind of a copy of that, and I'm going to put it over here. Now you can go off and make your feature branch for 6 months if you want. And in the meantime, you have 2 copies of the code. You can switch back and forth between the branches. You can say, this is master, this is the main line, this is what's in the live system. But Scott's over there developing a feature branch that may break the world. So we don't want his stuff in the main feature branch. He can take as long as he wants. And before he merges back into the main branch, we're going to make sure and we're going to look at his code closely. So looking ahead into the future, if you're one of those developers we hire, we're definitely going to have you work in the feature branch. And before you merge it back into real production code, when we share it with everybody else in the world, we're going to take a look and we'll have a code review and we'll talk about it. And once we're happy that everything's fine, it's not going to break things, you can switch back over to the main branch, merge, which means take all of the changes you made and get smart enough to say, what changes exist in Scott's feature branch that don't exist in master, and put them all back together again. So it's visually, it's like there's master, you can diverge to as many branches as you want, and later on, bring it all back. So that's another feature, powerful thing about Git that we haven't talked about. And Harper, this afternoon, yeah, here Melissa's even helping us out too with GitHub command line. So we're going to talk more about that, but I didn't want you to be confused on day 1 because there's so much happening on day 1. I wanted you to focus on, okay, let's get set up, let's relax, let's settle down. Harper, now is the time to hit him with Git branching and merging. So let's go up here and review a little bit more JavaScript. We're going to push the agenda back. I was talking with Harper on the phone. He realized we've only been here for about 2 hours and we're an hour and a half behind. So let's go through some of this stuff. We have code to give you as an example, but I wanted to cover some of the things that we've kind of just touched on very briefly. An array. In JavaScript, how do you create an array?
It's the same as creating another variable. So when you do the equals, you do...
It's just another variable type. And as a matter of fact, in this page, we don't even have any JavaScript yet. So let's go ahead and add some JavaScript, and let's create an array. And you know, let's do something I wouldn't normally do. Let's do it right here. Script type is equal to text / JavaScript. So this is what we had before. I'm going to comment that out in HTML. How do we comment out in HTML? It's like that. Just like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to make that dynamic. So we're going to create an array. How do we declare an array? It's var, we're declaring a variable, and let's say regions. So we're going to have an array of 2 elements. So that's how you declare an array. That is an empty array. Square brackets. I'm going to put 2 things in there. Now, I could do it like this, or I'm going to keep that there, and I'm going to comment it out just so you see different ways. Push. That's really what I wanted to get across. JavaScript array methods, this is where you have to start engaging your brain today. A method is what? We touched on it very briefly.
A function that is connected to an object.
Exactly right. The answer is a function that belongs to an object. That's all it is. So it's a function. You've already learned what a function is. It's just a function that belongs to an array, any array in this case. So push is a function that somebody else wrote for us and we can use. How does it work? It takes one parameter. It says, what do you want to add to your array? So you're pushing it into the array. So in this case, our first element, Americas. And we're going to have 2 elements. So I'm going to have, let's do it the slow way, EU. So I've created an array on line 13, and I've added a line, an elements to it, 14, another elements on 15. Now, let's use a for loop to iterate through the array and write it to the screen dynamically, rather than hard coding it like this. Who remembers our for loop syntax?
Where do you want to start? Where do you want to end?
So we could hard code 2 here, but that would be bad form. Because if we add another elements to our array, it's only going to show us the first couple. It would be nice to say however many elements you have in your array. There is a property. Once again, I'm trying to get you exposed to some of these technical concepts. A property is what? We learned a method is a function that belongs to an object. A property is a variable that belongs to an object. So regions.length. And notice the only difference is we don't have the open-close paren when we talk about properties. It's just there for us. So it's this kind of thing is it belongs to our regions because regions is an array. Regions is an array because of right there. So we're going to say less than length. So if we have it like this, what is the length property going to give us right there?
The 2 items in there.
What's what data type is length, do you think?
It's a number.
It's a number. It's a number. And it's going to be a whole number, so it's probably going to be an integer. And what's going to be in that variable at this point in time? 2. So the way we've written this, I'm trying to break it down to I is equal to 0. I is less than 2. So it's going to go through the first time, 0. Come back, and the iteration we have to put here, I++, add 1 to I every time you come through the loop. Loop body is we have curly braces. So we're going to say 0, is it less than 2? Yes. Go through the loop. Next iteration, add 1. 1, is it less than 2? Yes. Second time. Next iteration, 3, it's going to add it. This is how it knows to quit. 3 is not less than 2. Jump out. So it actually does set I to 3. It does happen. As a matter of fact, if I declared I up here, and I looked at I after the loop is done, it's going to have the number 3 in it. Because that's how it knew to jump out. We we don't care about that right now, so I'm just telling you about the functionality of a for loop. So now, what do we want to do with this? We want to actually write this stuff. And Balance on Friday said, you know, Ali, when you started writing HTML and CSS from JavaScript, you know, that was uncool. You shouldn't have done that. It's like, I didn't even realize I was doing it because that's usually what developers do in the front end with JavaScript. They're rewriting the UI in different ways. But you're right. But I'm going to show you that in this case, it's not so bad. You got to get into the mindset of text is just text. Don't worry about it. Just keep your delimiter straight. Single quotes, double quotes, match them up. So in this case, help me out. We need to actually write elements of the document. How are we going to write the document elements? We saw this is a document object method. Document.writeLine. I think that's the way we did it. And it takes one parameter. It takes the text of whatever we want to write. So what we want to write here is exactly this, except the elements, the data is inside of the elements of our array. So what should we write here?
0 and 1.
So the data is going to be, let's talk about the data first. So regions is going to be our array. How do we talk about an element of the array?
Space.
It's not space, it's not dot, square bracket. It's like, I want to talk about a piece of it, which element. And then we have to say which number of the array, each iteration.
0 and 1.
Well, it's going to be 0 and 1, but we have a variable that tells us that, I. So that's going to write out just the data. So it's going to say Americas and EU. That may or may not completely break our page. Let's try that, because we don't have any HTML. Remember, what does our browser speak? It only speaks HTML, really. So I saved it. I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to refresh. It kind of shows up. There's a space in between, but it's no longer really a table. Let's take a look and see what it did. Yeah, just text right there. So the browser's doing the best it can, but it's like, I don't know what you mean there. We need to make that HTML so the browser can understand. So see this comment stuff down here? We need to make it look like that. Help me make this, just the data, be properly formatted HTML. Who's cool with this? Who understands how to write HTML from JavaScript? One of you who thinks you know it, please tell me.
Okay, so you put quotes and then you put the less than sign, then TH, column span, 2.
Do we have to have delimiter? We're going to have delimiters. Is that going to be all right or no?
No.
No. Why is that not going to be all right so everybody understands it?
Because it'll stop. It'll tell it to stop.
Yes. Because we used a single quote to start our string here, computers aren't smart. It's going to say, oh, you're done with your string. But that's not really what we want, because we want the number 2 to be part of our HTML. So we want to do that, right? So go on.
Okay. Less than sign, then quote, single quote.
Yep.
Region. Then you go over to the end of the
Almost.
the array thing.
We need to concatenate. How do you say concatenate in
Plus.
a plus sign? Okay. So we're going to concatenate whatever's in that variable there, and that's an index of the array named regions. And we're going to concatenate some more over here. So at this point, down here, Sasha has walked us through that. Now we're doing this a little bit here. Go ahead.
You just close it, but single quotes.
That is absolutely perfect. So I'm going to save that. So we're going to come back to that in a second. I just want to make sure that it looks the way you think it should. Yep. So we fixed our page. We made it dynamic. For loops, get used to it. It's always pretty much the same thing. Get used to concatenation. Get used to understanding single quotes, double quotes, why we need to do that. if I did this, contrary to what Sasha told us to do, what would happen?
Yeah, I think it's going to read as a string.
It's just going to be a string. It's going to say regions, square bracket, I, and you're going to scare some users out there. It's not going to understand that's a variable because you didn't concatenate whatever the variable value is. So you have to tell it, that's the end of my first bit of the string, concatenates, concatenates, concatenate. Single quotes, double quotes, it doesn't really matter. And you've seen this once. I'll show you it again, just so you're not afraid of it in the future. That's how you escape a single quote if you want. That says, backslash inside of a string says the next character that you see, treat it exactly as that character. Don't try to interpret it. That's why even in editors it says that's what's going on there. Okay? Okay, so let's move on. So we've got an array, push, pop, splice, join. Okay, so push is how you add an element to an array. See that? I added 2 elements. This is another way if I wanted to initialize the array automatically with 2 elements. If I wanted to get rid of one, you can pop an element to the array. Splice says, kind of like when you have a cord, and you say you've got an internet cord or a telephone cord, and you need to cut it and then kind of put it together somewhere else. Splice does exactly that with an array element. So it says if you have 10 elements and you want to get rid of like the 3rd element, you can tell Splice to say, I want to take out the 3rd element and kind of put the rest of them together. So that's how you can add or delete elements from an array anywhere in the list. So Splice is, it's like your Swiss Army knife for arrays. You're going to use that a lot. I'll admit, and Harper's going to shake his head, I have to look up Splice every time I use it because it's got 3 parameters, and I've got to go, okay, which one comes in which order? I look it up every time. For some reason, I don't remember what order it goes in. It's got one that says, how many elements do you want to delete? What position in the array do you want to start from? It's like, okay, I'll go read the documentation because I do it so infrequently. But I'm just telling you, go look it up and learn Splice because you'll use it once a month. Pop just says, I want to, instead of removing an element or adding elements anywhere in the array, pop says, you know, the last element, boop, pop it off. We don't need it anymore. So it deletes an element, but only from one side. Join, let's see what join does. So, alert, let's see, regions. Save that, jump over here, refresh. There we go. So what did that do? It took the elements of the array and allowed us to join them all together. One statement. That's an array method. It's a function that belongs to an array that says if you have 10 elements and you want to put them all together as a string, and usually you don't say and then, usually you have a comma. So if you want to create a comma-separated value, CSV, array.join will take all of the elements in the array and put them all together in one big string. So the input is an array. The output is a string. That's all it does. So array, whatever array, dot join, and then this, the one parameter, you don't even have to pass. I think it's automatic. It'll assume you don't want to join by anything, I think. So if I save that, it'll work, but it's not going to be pretty. Oh, the default happens to be a comma, which is the most often used delimiter. So it'll put it all together with a comma. If you want to change it from a comma to something else, you'd specify the delimiter right there. Tilde or bar or whatever else you want to separate them.
So it goes in between every single element within the array.
The question was, so it goes in between each element? That's absolutely right. We have 2 elements. Just to show, we're going to break our HTML, but let's push Asia. Now we're going to break our HTML because now we're going to have 3 table header tags, and the rest of the table is going to not know what to do. But we're going to see this, which is really our point. So I'm going to save that. See, it put the comma in between America's EU, EU, and Asia, because we had 3 elements. And our table, notice how forgiving or flexible HTML is in the browser. It's like, well, I don't really know what you mean, Ali, but I'm going to do my best. Okay. So those are the array methods. Those are part of normal JavaScript. We haven't even talked about jQuery yet. The other day we had a challenge where it was go ahead and generate randomly colored backgrounds for divs on the page and allow the user to enter how many divs they want. I think that was on Friday. The solution to the ultra hard challenge, and believe me, it was a lot harder than I thought. Okay, if you looked at the ultra hard challenge, if you got that, pat yourself on the back, because that covered some concepts that I've been doing this for 20 years, and it took me a few minutes. Like, wait a minute, what's going on here? So I wanted to go back and say, what is set timeout? That is one of the most powerful statements in all of JavaScript. Let's talk about threads of execution. A thread, you've already used them. A thread is when you read code, you're pretending to be the computer interpreting every line of code one at a time. That is one thread. The thread is actually a computer software concept that says, for each thread, I can do one set of instructions linearly. You can have any number of threads. So now we're talking about what's called parallel processing. So when you run your page, and you run your JavaScript, let's go back to our code here. We read this, and it's fairly straightforward. We go 13, 14, 15. That is one thread of execution. The interpreter is going to run that. When you say set timeout, you're saying, computer, go on and continue with that, but asynchronously, that's an important word, I want you to create a new thread of execution and do this in parallel. So now all of a sudden you have your computer doing multiple things at the same time, all your bidding. You could have as many threads as you want. So that's where the complexity comes in. Why do you care about threads? You care about threads because if you want to get lots of things done at the same time and your computer is powerful enough to do so, you've heard about things went from 1-core processors to 2-core to 4-core to 6-core. If you write like this, the way it's been for 25 years, you're not taking advantage of all those other threads of execution. Each processor is going to run one kind of primary thread. It's not that simple, but I'm dumbing it down here for our own benefit for the conversation. If you want to take advantage of all those other processor cores to be getting them to work at the same time, you need to spawn other threads. And that's a computer word, spawn. Spawn means create another thread of execution, run this code over here while I'm running this code. We're not going to write parallel systems right now because even the best developers in the world will write bad code and buggy code when you're talking about asynchronous processing because humans aren't meant to think like that. Humans are made to think like this, one step at a time. When you start having multiple things going on concurrently, and this one might run a little bit faster than this one, and you got to keep track of, oh, what happens if they come back together? At what point are they going to come back together and share information? That's where even the best developers in the world get headaches. So there are special programming concepts that you can go into, like semaphores and mutexes and nasty things that the original language designers back in the 70s thought of that are necessary, but we're not going to talk about them. I'm going to tell you the basic concepts of threads of execution. This is what you need to know on a daily basis. What you need to know is that a set timeout spawns another thread of execution that allows you to run whatever code you specify after a certain number of milliseconds. So let's make it so that when we load the page, we're going to do this regions join thing after 10 seconds. So set timeout at the very simplest, the way you can think of it is, I don't want you to do this right now. I want you to do this after X number of milliseconds. And it's very simple, set timeout. The first parameter is the code, the bundle of code that you want to happen. So we're going to create an anonymous function. And I'm going to say, do it after 10 seconds. If I said that, what does that mean? That's 10 milliseconds. So that's going to happen virtually immediately. So 10 seconds, a millisecond is 1/1000th. So we'd multiply by 1,000 or say 10,000. That's 10 seconds. So I'm going to take this that used to be in our normal thread of execution, and I'm going to put it in our function body right there. So when we load the page, it's going to do this immediately, and it looks like it's done. But in reality, we told the browser, I want you to set timeout is a horrible name, by the way. I don't know why they named it that. But it says run whatever code I give you here after this number of milliseconds. So I'm going to save that. Let's go over here and refresh. It's done refreshing. Now let's wait 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. OK. So it waited 10 seconds before it ran that code. Now, think about the possibilities. It's done in milliseconds, and milliseconds are hardly perceptible to humans. You could tell set timeout that after 20 milliseconds, move the left of a CSS 10 pixels. After another 50 milliseconds, move it again. And if you put that all together, it's like a movie. It's animation. So you can do anything you want with set timeout. All these other fancy libraries we're about to throw on you and say, look, go have fun, they're all using these tools just underneath the covers. You can be as creative as you want to be and make some really impressive stuff with these basic tools. So inside of here, watch, just so we don't have to wait 10 seconds, I'm going to make it 2 seconds. And you know, I could call myself again. Instead of an inline function, you could have a normal function. So we don't need that, because that was just an anonymous function. This is actually easier to look at, right? Let's make sure this works. Now, this is part of the lesson this morning. This is the function definition on line 20. What am I doing on line 23?
Calling the function.
No, 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 no. That's the whole point of this discussion. I am not calling that function.
Resetting it.
What am I doing?
Resetting it again.
I'm not resetting it.
You're telling it to be called later.
I'm telling it to be called later, but how am I doing that? I'm passing it as a parameter. I'm using a function as a variable. That's called a function pointer. I'm not going to get into why it's called that, but it's saying, you know this thing called show alert? I want to pass it as a parameter so that after 2 seconds, I want you to call that and run it. So I could, it's a variable really. I could say, you could actually say var is equal to, there's several syntax, but the point is, why am I, how does the compiler, how does JavaScript know that I'm not calling show alert right there? What's the difference between that and how you call a function normally? There's no parens. That's exactly right. If I were to say parenthesis, it would run right now, and this code wouldn't work. What we're really doing is saying, I want this named function to be called, so I'm passing it. It's like, it's called a function pointer because it says, this is where I defined it, and internally in the code it says, oh, that's where I go to run that function. It's a pointer to it. I'm not actually running it right here. So let's make sure, and we'll take the next step in just a second. So I'm saving that. It's only 2 seconds. There it is. Okay, so it popped up. We know it still works. That was the whole point. Here's the power of how you can do this over and over. What in the world did I just do? That's called recursion. And we're not going to get into exactly what's going on, but let's follow it through. We know how to follow this through now. So set timeout. It says after 2 seconds, I want you to call this function. It's going to call the function. It's going to do the alert. And then, what is it going to do again? Computers are plodding animals, like an oxen. Okay, what am I going to do now? Set timeout, show alert. Okay, so it's going to do it again. 2 seconds later. When it runs again, it's going to do it again. This is going to run perpetually. Kind of a loop, except it's calling itself. That's never going to stop. Yeah? But why might you use this? What are some of the things you could do with this? Yar's like, oh, that's how the advertisers do it. Yeah, that's exactly how the advertisers do it. So you see threads of execution, how they can make animations and other things, and after 5 seconds on the page, it pops up and says, do you want to buy this or that? Yeah, that's how they do it. It all comes back to set timeout. So I'm going to comment this out because otherwise it's really annoying and it'll never go away. Another thing you can do with that is you can do some animations. You could have a little if statement in here that says, oh, stop animating. And then if you say stop animating, it just won't set timeout again. So it'll stop. Start thinking about the power of what you can do with these things. These are very simple tools, but used creatively, you can do some very interesting things. Okay. Selector syntax mirrors CSS. You understand that. We went over a function definition. The difference between calling a function and passing a function. Paren. If you put parens around it, you're calling it. When you're passing it, you don't use the parentheses. Java is not JavaScript. JavaScript is what we've covered so far. Java is actually a completely separate language. So don't get those two confused, because if you're in an interview, there goes your interview. Comparison operators. So we've touched on these briefly. Who can tell me what, let me make that bigger. What are these things? I put a comma in between them. What does that mean in English? Not equal. So this is how you compare things. That means not equal. It's very important that we understand the difference between 2 equals and 1 equal in JavaScript. 2 equals means what?
You're comparing it. So is it this?
It's is it equal in English. If I'm assigning it, if I'm setting equal to, I don't even have one.
In the for loop.
Oh, there we go. That 1 equal is I'm setting 0 into the variable named I. That means, is I equal to 0? You're asking a question. 2 different things. A common programmer error, at least in C#, is if I equals 0. That is nasty, nasty. Just, you're missing 1 equal, and that's hard to see, because if you look at it quickly. That says set I is equal to 0, and then, oh, is that true or false? Well, in this case, it's false, because 0 is falsy. If I set it to 1, then it looks at the 1. It's like, is 1 true or false? It's probably true. But that's not at all what you meant. You meant that. It's like, is I equal to 1? So the problem with that is the compiler is not going to catch you. The computer is going to say, okay, I don't know why you're doing that, but it's valid. You know, you want to set I is equal to 1 and then look at it? You can do that all day long. So what's this? This is just from grade school. Same thing. Less than. Greater than. That's how you say greater than or equal to. A less than or equal to. My bad, yeah. This is greater than or equal to. What in the world do you think that does?
Exact value.
So this is the same thing as 2 equals, except it tells JavaScript, I don't want you to help me out. If it's a different data type, I don't want you to cast it to a string, or it needs to be exactly the same. JavaScript, and this just came in like 2 or 3 years ago, I believe, where it used to be everything was just equal, equal. But if you say 3 equals, it means it has to be exactly that value. 1 equals to double quote 1. In some cases, if you say equal, equal, oh yeah, it's close enough. You're good. If you want to say equal, 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 that means exactly that data type and value.
How I was able to comprehend this in real applications is, you know, in Excel, if you put in letters and numbers together, sometimes it doesn't know whether to treat it as a text or a number. And this is what we're saying. We're saying leave it as exactly how I wanted it, how I entered it. Don't try to format into a text or a number.
Okay, let me repeat that for the people in Richmond. Somebody is an Excel power user, and the way she made it understand in her brain was, in Excel, sometimes when you type in, I don't even have Excel in here, when you type in a number, and by default, Excel is going to treat it like strings. Everything's a string, I believe. And if it infers it, it's like, okay, that's, say you type 53 in there. Sometimes Excel says, oh, this is a text that's being treated, this is a number being treated as text. I think is the little arrow message that pops up. This is the equivalent in JavaScript. It says, treat it exactly the way it is. Don't try to convert it to a number. Don't try to convert it to a string to match it. Treat it exactly the way it is. What goes with it? The not equal equal. That means using a very, very specific comparison methodology. Is it exactly the same or not? That's all it means. So we learned browser as a container. There are other containers for JavaScript. Browser just happens to be the most common. Node.js, which we're going to use a Node.js application that I built over the weekend. We're going to learn about Node.js and MongoDB on the 13th day, next week. I've created a repository, and I will share it with you. And I've created instructions step by step. It took like an hour and a half to create the app, and it took 6 hours to document it. So I hope it's worth it. Please look at the documentation, otherwise I would have wasted 6 hours of my life. So it's step by step. This is how you create a MongoDB in the cloud. This is how you create a Node.js application. This is how you install everything. So you can create your own Node.js and Mongo database.
And install it yourself?
All from scratch. So that's step by step. I'll share that with you later on. You don't have to do that until day 13. So I'm just saying, you know, here's a little peek ahead. Why did I do it for today? Because we're going to use that Node.js application over here. This is a Node.js application. Express is a Node web server that talks JavaScript. What is this thing right here?
It's referring to the API Twilio.
It's the result of a call. We talked about, remember on day 1 or day 2, we talked about verbs, HTTP verbs? That's all the web speaks. So when we have something on the URL line here, what verb are we using? It's always when it's up there. It's a get. Okay, so we're doing a get. Let me refresh this, and you'll see down here in the network tab what's going on.
Is that G-E-T or G-I-T?
G-E-T, capital G. And as a matter of fact, we click on it, and it says get right there. So we said we executed a get request, GET, and we got a response of 304, not modified. Okay? Now that's helpful, but I've showed you where you can go and look for the response codes. 304, not modified. Okay? So if we want to say, over here is your API. So that is I'm kind of tying all this stuff together in a haphazard fashion. But this is a Node.js application that stores its data in MongoDB. MongoDB is a non-relational database. You don't have to understand what I'm talking about here, but I'm telling you, I'm giving you a peek behind the curtain. This is where we're going. Today, you're going to be a consumer of this back-end application. If you want to peek behind the curtain, look inside the black box, be my guest. I'm going to give you the repo, I'm going to give you the instructions. But today, you're going to be using jQuery to talk to this public web API that talks JSON. What is JSON? Balance. What's JSON? What does it stand for? JavaScript object notation. That's a fancy term for, it's a JavaScript object. How do we define an object in JavaScript? Curly brace. So how do we define an array in JavaScript? Square brackets. So use your brain about what you've learned so far. What are we looking at on the screen here? What is that? It's an array of objects. How many objects do we have? How many elements in the array do we have?
2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
No, elements in the array.
4.
We have 3.
2. It's only 2. 1.
1. Just 1.
4, 5.
Elements in the array. Remember, elements in the array. An array element is that's the object from there to there. What are these things called? Those are properties or attributes of our object. So we got one object, but we have 1, 2, 3 properties, 3 variables. Properties, what does that mean? It's a variable that belongs to an object. That's all it is. And we have, what are the names of our properties? It's API_ID. The value is that. The second variable name is vote_count. The third variable name is API_name. So this is the result of an API, a public API, that you're going to be able to call. Now, how do I vote? And I've got this over here on the agenda. We'll see this in a minute. I'm going to press enter. So that is a what type? I put it on the URL.
Query.
What type of HTTP verb?
Okay.
It's a get. Okay? And it says, preview, what did you get back? Oh, here's another nice thing that Chrome knows how to do that you haven't seen yet. Chrome knows how to say, oh, that's JSON, I got you. Let me format it nicely for you. Okay? So this is the nasty text you got back, but it says, oh, let me help you out here. Let me make it pretty. So what did it say here? Success, true, okay. Message, okay. This says get Ali's vote. Tahbaze is my name, and I've set you all up in the MongoDB. So you're in a database. Your GitHub username is what you should use to vote. Now, don't do it like this. You have to post to get to vote. So what are the verbs? Getting back to day one. What are the HTTP verbs? Get is like this. That means on the URL line, just give me something back. What's another one?
Post.
Post. Post is often used to create. That's the metaphor that web developers use. So post means create. We can't easily post unless we use jQuery or something called Postman. I'll show you that in a minute. What's a third one? There are 2 more that are commonly used.
Update.
A put. A put is a metaphor usually for an update. So we've got get, post, put. We're not using put in this application. And there's a fourth that's common.
Delete.
Delete. So if I sent a delete command, what do you think this should do? Same format, but I say delete. It's going to delete my vote. That's exactly what I've implemented in Node.js. So I'll show you how to cheat. You can download, and I've put a link to it here, Postman right there. So this is on your course agenda for today. You can download that if you like. Do it at the break. What that will do is it will give you this application. Let me show you what the application looks like. Okay. So you can have little what they call sessions. So there's a post, a get, and a delete. And Harper, I was voting for you during testing, so sorry about that. You're going to have to delete. As a matter of fact, let me delete my own vote. There's a delete. And notice, what is that? What is that syntax right there? That's not our URL, is it? That's my local. Local host means my local computer. So I had my Node.js application running on my computer. What does that colon mean? Port. If I said that, if I got rid of the port specification, what would that mean? What's the default HTTP port?
80.
80. Okay? So, locally, by default, Node.js, we'll talk about that another time, but that's just talking over a different channel. It's like channels on a TV. A port is, I'm talking over that channel. By default, if you don't specify, you're talking over channel 80, port 80. Okay, so this, if you want to test and see how to interact with the API, you can say post. How do you send something? You can send it JavaScript like that. This is the body of the request. Post says, give me a little piece of data and send it. What have we got here? What is this thing? It's just JavaScript. What is it?
It's an object.
It's an object. How many properties does it have?
1.
One. What's the name of the property? API name. And it's got a value of Slack. That's all it is. Okay? So, you can go look at that. You don't have to download Postman because the challenge is going to be this. You're going to be using this brand new skill we're about to introduce to you called $.ajax. $.ajax is by far the most commonly used function in jQuery. What does it do? It allows you to talk with back-end web servers and get responses back. You can send any HTTP verbs you want. Get, put, post, delete, even options and patch if you want. It will send whatever data you want to any URL and allow you to get data back without having to show anything to the user interface if you don't want to. Remember about 10 years ago where you clicked a button, you'd have to wait a few seconds? And now you click a button on almost any website and it's almost immediate, or it comes up and it shows you something? Getting back to our threads of execution. That's asynchronous processing. So when you click the button, it still takes just as long as it did 10 years ago, for the most part. But now, what happens is, you're doing the equivalent of like a set timeout, and you're saying, go do that, and when you get your response back, let me know, code, and I'm going to tell the user about it. And they keep you entertained with a little spinner or something, but really the work still takes just as long. They're just better about telling you what's going on. So, we're going to get right there. I wanted to show you this. So, 11:15. Let me come back and do this later. Here are, if you want to play, here are all the events that are commonly used in jQuery. We talked about, I think it was Scott in the first day that we talked about jQuery. Are there other things other than click? Yeah. Here are some others. Let me explain briefly what they are. You know the syntax. We're going to cover more syntax in jQuery. But here are some others that you can play with if you want. Focus. That event, let's talk about what an event is. Who can tell us what an event is?
Something that happens based on user input.
Aaron says something that happens based on user input. And that's right. An event is a trigger that happens that you can write code for. So whenever this happens, you can say, I want you, computer, to run my code, and here it is. Usually you pass that as an anonymous function. So let's go write one of these. So let's have a little button down here at the bottom, and we've already got one. So we've got a little button, we've named it, we've entered an ID of submit button. So let's write some JavaScript, and we're going to be nasty just so we can have yeah, I know, Harper, I'm teaching them bad habits. So I'm going to have a script tag right underneath the button just so you can see it all together. And we need to have some jQuery. So we haven't included jQuery. We're going to have to do that in a second. But we're going to write some jQuery before we even do that. So how do we say, wait till the page loads? Now, ready is, what kind of thing is ready? We've learned about properties, methods.
Go out and get it and have it ready for, to execute the next function that I'm going to write for.
Well, this ready is, what is it? We've got properties, methods.
It's a method.
Oh,
No. We just talked about it.
it's a call.
It's an event. Because it's saying, what are we saying here? We're saying when this is ready, when that's triggered, run my code. It's exactly what we just talked about. So ready is an event. And this little anonymous function, that's how you tell it, this is the code I want you to run when that happens. Okay, so when it,
I have a
question.
Quick question. Does document need to have the, not parentheses, but the quotation marks around it?
Does document need to have quotes around it like that?
Yes.
No.
And on the, yeah.
No, doesn't need that. So, all we've done with this line of code, it says, jQuery, when you finish loading the page and you're ready for me to have my code run, let me know. That's all you're doing. And we did that by giving it a function definition to the ready event. So the ready event is, it is a function, but it's a function that is being called and given to us. So it's called an event. What do we want to do? Let's make it so that when we click this button, we post to a public API. Let's do a get to a public API, pretend API, that's going to give us back a list of winners. So how do we say, let's walk through step by step. So we're going to have, we have to select the button, so $, and how do we talk about that button? That's not going to work, but what are we missing? Hash, because it's an ID of submit-button. And when we do what to it? This is an event. When we click it. So we want to say, click event. This is what is called wiring it up. You're saying, when the click event happens, tell me about it, and I want to write my own code. How do we say, here's my own code? Here's a little bundle of code.
Function.
Give it a function. Anonymous function, because it doesn't have a name. That's why it's called anonymous. Inside of here, this code will run when they click submit button. What are we going to do? We're going to get info from a public API. We're not going to do that just yet. That's just a comment. So when I run this page right now, what's going to happen? Crash and burn. Why is it going to crash and burn?
You haven't identified where you want it to go get.
JavaScript.
You need to do something with your function.
What did we forget to do? We haven't set a reference to jQuery. So I can talk jQuery all I want, but the browser doesn't know what that is yet. Once again, you're going to see how lazy I am. I don't memorize the tag for jQuery. I'm going to go steal it from, we do it on Friday?
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm going to go steal it from one of these places. Probably, yep. I'm going to get that. Paste it there. And I need the little tag too, because I can't remember that either. Nope. Cancel. Well, looks like we didn't do a whole lot of jQuery. There we go. Copy that. Paste it. Scripts, same subdirectory, we're good. So now it knows what jQuery is. So now all this syntax is going to work. But is anything going to run different when I load the page? No. Because we haven't done anything. All we've done is wired it up, but we didn't actually call anything. So is that going to run and show when I load the page? No. Why not?
So based on
Because we said this little bit of code only runs when the click event is triggered. So somebody has to click on this thing with an ID of submit-button. So that's how to read jQuery. And this really, it took me a little while to understand what in the world are they writing. All they're doing most of the time in jQuery is they're writing functions that if this happens, run that function. Okay? So let's go ahead and save that. Let's make sure we're working up to that point. And I don't have it open anymore. Okay. So now if we, oh no. Okay, I think I commented out the one that calls itself. So it looks like it doesn't like that.
maybe because the other OS there.
Let's see. Let me comment out this other stuff because it's going to just be confusing. So we don't need that for now. I'm going to comment it out. I'm not deleting it, so you'll be able to look at it later. So when we click on inputs, ID is able to submit -button. Function alert got here. Okay, saved it, refresh, got here. Okay? So we know that it's going to run when we click the button. Now, what I'm going to show you very quickly about what $.ajax does. Actually, it's not even like that. Let's go over to jQuery. And you know, I do this so often, just like I copied and pasted that reference to jQuery. I do this so often. Whenever I do this, I don't write from scratch. I copy and paste. So I don't even know the exact syntax for the $.ajax function. Now this is completely honest. So let's do jQuery.com, and we're going to know, go look at, it's going to be a method. Ajax, and okay, this is painful. It's sad when the site of record can't tell you right off, but with a search. That's why Google wins. Okay, so Ajax, not an event. This is more $.ajax.
Harper, just
You paste it? Thank you, Harper. I know it's painful. There we go. Thank you. So we've learned that the $sign is actually just a synonym for the word jQuery. So that's why nobody ever writes out jQuery, because you can just say $sign. So this is the documentation. And I'm a lazy developer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to skip down through all this, and I'm going to look at their examples. It's like, okay, this, thanks page, but I'm going to jump to the end. Show me the cool stuff. And I'm going to paste it, and I'm going to change it. You know, that wasn't a good enough example, so I'm going to scroll down some more. That wasn't a good enough example. Give me the good stuff. You know, none of that is really too interesting. So, but by looking at it, let's take a look and we can figure out what the API is. What does Ajax expect? It expects one parameter. What type of parameter is that? An object. It takes an object. And inside of that object, you've got some things that you can do. We've learned what a property is. A property, somebody tell the class what a property is.
Variable that belongs to an
It's a variable that belongs to an object. So URL is a variable that has, what type of variable is it? A string that belongs to this object, and it has that value. What is this called? That is a function attached to an object. What's the word for that? A method. That's all it is. So there are only two things that can be attached to an object. A property, which is a variable, and a method, which is a function. You've already learned all the little tools. It's just about putting them together and understanding the nonsense developer speak. So none of that is really satisfactory. I'm going to go do what I normally do, and I'm going to steal for myself. This is a real project. And let's see, web, scripts, app, and let's try to find one that's not too ugly, and we'll have what we want. Okay, so let's search for $.ajax. What do you know? Okay, so I'm going to copy that, close that. I will actually show you real code and how bad some of this stuff is, but not today, because today it's kind of not relevant to what we're talking about. So let's go back over here, and I'm going to do this. Look what I was doing wrong. You don't pass it a function, you pass it an object, so that would have been right. But then I still wouldn't know all the properties and methods that it wants me to use. So I'm going to paste this because I know this is exactly what it wants. So let's comment all these out, and I'm going to explain what each of these things mean. Okay, at the very basic, what are we doing with $.ajax? What does Ajax stand for? Anybody know?
Asynchronous JavaScript and markup language.
XML. XML used to be cool. So asynchronous, JavaScript, and XML. So asynchronous, we learned that word like an hour ago. That just means don't stop and wait. You're going to spawn another thread of execution, go run, and when you're done, let me know. Asynchronous, doesn't happen at the same time. So how do I know when it's done? There is an event defined as a little function. It's like, oh, the success method, I want you to call that and let me know when you're done. It's not very good to just be told you're done. Most of the time when you're talking to a web API, you get data back. So where do you get your data? It gives you a parameter. That's what the result is. So all we really have to do at the very simplest, because there's defaults for all of these things, what is the API? Now, let's use our own API because I actually know what the output's going to be. This. If we run that, okay, it's going to give us that JavaScript. So I'm going to copy and paste that over here. And how did I know what that is? In your agenda today, right there. You can copy and paste it. Okay, it's right there. And here are all the verbs and what to pass it to get it to do what you want. So that's our next exercise. We're about to go there. So that's the URL. Am I going to talk? Which verb am I going to talk? By default, you wouldn't know this, the default is get. So it would work. But it's nice to be explicit, so get. There are two things that you could set. One is, what's the format of the text or input data that I'm giving you? And what is the response type of text that I want back? That's data type and content type. Don't have to worry about it here. Ignore it. Cache. Cache means if you hit this 10 times, and we're going to hit it by clicking a button, the browser wants to be efficient. So it's going to try to cache it and remember the response from last time. if you want to defeat the cache, which means every time I click the button, you better go call that API again because something could have changed in that 1 millisecond. You have to say cache false to say, browser, I don't want your help. Thank you very much. We'll leave it on. It's not going to hurt us here. Get, you can't really pass things as a bundle. There's no data. There's no payload. It just, whatever's on the URL, you're going to get something back. What do you get back? Whatever is in result. So, now this is starting to look scary. On day 1, you would have left the room. And you would say, I'm never going back there. Now you kind of understand what's going on. We are wiring things up down to here. Ajax is wiring things up as well, but it runs and says, you know, I want you right now, Ajax, to go call this URL using that HTTP verb, and when you're done, call this, passing me whatever you got back. And what are we going to do with it? We're just going to write it on the console. That's all we're going to do. So, we saw in the browser that this is what it looks like. Okay, that's the response. So let's go ahead and run this. And I click this. It says, oh. This says, I'm not allowed to talk to it because where I'm from, this, for security reasons, what the web servers or web browsers like to do is they want to know that the code talking to it is actually coming from the same domain as what's being served. So for security reasons, we need to have cross-origin. We need to say, it's all right. Don't be that secure. It's fine. We trust everybody. So I'm going to have to go do that, but it's good we try this, because otherwise everyone would come back 5 minutes after I said go try the exercise. It's like, I'm getting this. What did I do wrong? You're doing nothing wrong. We just need to give it a little bit looser permissions there. Okay, so let's go to, what's another good one that we can use? A site that's been set up that doesn't have cross-site scripting restrictions. You know, we don't even have to use, I'm going to use that URL. It doesn't have to be a valid one. If we do that, what are we going to get back?
We go to that website?
So what we're telling Ajax to do is do a get to that page, and when you do a get, think about how the web works. What do you get back if you do a get against a page?
The objects, or whatever it is.
You get the HTML and CSS and text, everything that's in the page. Because if you think about it, when we go up here, that is a get. There's nothing different. All we're doing with Ajax is saying, I want you to go get it asynchronously and give me the result back. So let's do this. It's not going to be very pretty, I'm warning you. Unexpected identifier because I forgot my comma. Now if we click, it says, oh, same problem. Cross-site scripting. So I think there's a way, yeah, Harper's already probably posted it. It's like, yeah, this is just, yeah, he was helping me about that. Get it to say, don't bother me with the cross-site scripting security permissions. We'll come back here in a minute. But I wanted you to show you $.ajax and the verbs. So with your API, your challenge is going to be get tally. So when you say get tally, this is what I mean. That URL. And it's going to give you, that's our data back. As you all continue to vote, this is going to change. It's going to change because this is a dynamic app. It's reading from a MongoDB database, and it's going to aggregate it up, and it's going to give you the current results real time as soon as you hit that. So you need to do a get there. We're going to do a get APIs. How do you know what the possibilities are for voting? There they are. what type of JSON did we get back here?
An array.
It's an array. We knew that because it started with a square bracket. An array of what? Objects. I'm breaking in kind of rough here, but this is really how the world talks in JSON. It's almost always an array of objects. Or it's an object that contains an array of objects, because that's how you throw a whole bunch of data around. So you got an array of, there's one object. How do you separate different elements of the array? Just a comma. And you've got two properties in each element, underscore ID and name, and those are the values. So if we wanted to read this, we know how to read JavaScript. So let's pretend it's working. So we've got an array, and we're getting something like that back. As a matter of fact, I'm going to copy and paste it over here into our code and comment it so we know what's going on. That's really ugly, isn't it?
Harper said, try adding this. Try adding this to Ajax object properties. Cross domain : true.
Thank you, Harper. So that's Ajax saying, you know, I don't really trust you, even though it's our own code, which is kind of silly. But let's pretend, because oftentimes you're going to write code blind anyway. So let's pretty this up, and let's put only two elements in here. So now, let's get down to writing the code. So we're going to get, this result thing is going to be an array of objects. That's the way you got to start thinking about this. How do we loop through our array of objects and do something with it? Let's actually put it into a, I don't want to do that. Let's put it into a div for now. So let's have a little div here, just so we can see the results. We've done this before. I'm going to give it an ID, API result. Okay? So I'm just putting a place where we can see the results on the screen. That's all I'm doing here. You could just as easily populate elements in a drop-down list, a select. So how do we loop through the elements of this array we're going to get back? A for loop. This just happens to be an array that we didn't create, but we can use all the tools. So what is the what? Result. Dot length. It's an array. So we're going to loop through every element, and each element, there's one element. So how do we talk about it? It's an object. So let's talk about that element first. Obj is equal to, how do we talk about that element of the array? Square bracket. We could if we always wanted to talk about the first element. But how do we say the current element? We use the array iterator, I. Because the first time it's going to be 0, the second time will be 2, and so 1, and so on. So now that's going to be our object. We could do that. We're going to write it very longhand this time. And we really don't care about this ID thing right now, because that's kind of, users are going to, they're not going to understand what that is. But they are going to understand this. They're going to understand name. So let's just put the name into this div and just append it all the way down. How do we do that?
So you need to go to the div first.
We need to find the div. Should we find the div inside of our for loop or outside of our for loop?
Inside the for loop.
You can. It'll work. Let's do it this way first. So how do we find our div? It's called ID of API result. So let's go ahead and, how do we talk about it? Hashtag API result. If we wanted to be very specific, what could we say? We could say that. Just to mix it up, let's not do it this time. So how do we say add to that? What are we appending?
A specific part of the result, which is name.
So we've got one element right there. How do we talk about the property in that element, that object? There are two ways. Somebody tell me each way.
They lost the stream.
Okay, Richmond, let me know when you're there. Okay, so we've got one element of the array right here. What does that element look like? It looks like this. So we want to talk about just the name in that object. How do you talk about a piece of an object?
Dot attribute. So you'd have to go to the ID of that object. So the $sign.
Nope, nope, no dollar signs here. Straight JavaScript.
Okay.
Richmond, help us out. How do we talk about a property in an object?
The dot attribute.
They got a delay, so that it's not really fair. Dot. Another way is that. Okay? So the name value. Now we've got it. All we have to do is put it in here. Now it's going to run together unless we do something to separate the text, because it's really just text. So we probably want to do something like this, just to make it go on a separate line. Okay, let's see if the cross-domain magic works. By the way, just to show you how you'll see that in the wild, this is how you'll see it. Nobody's going to write it out with 3 or 4 statements. They're going to do this. Okay? Same thing. That is exactly right. That was kind of unfair because you have a delay going on over there, but so let's go over here and let's see. No. We'll need to, oh, wait a minute. That's because, well, we were using the wrong URL. But still not going to help. So that cross-domain true thing is probably not going to be what we need. So we're going to have to go figure out how to tell JavaScript Ajax to leave us alone and trust us. We'll do that in a minute. But in the meantime, I'm going to hard code this. And we're going to try it. Bless you. So I'm going to, let's do this. So I'm going to simulate the result just so we can make the point here and we can move on. Okay, so what are we doing here? We've got, I'm setting a variable equal to the result that we will get back. We copied that exactly from the result on the page. We've got a little for loop, and we've got to name this result if it's going to match. And we've got an iterator, And we've got that same div in the page. We're going to append result I name. And there we go. That's all going to happen when?
After the list with,
When I click what? Any cell. Any cell in any table as long as it's a TD. Right there it is. So that's not very impressive because we didn't actually talk with the internet. But we know that our code is going to work because this result is identical to what we see here. It just has fewer entries. So let's, after lunch, I want you to take half an hour and play with $.ajax. During lunch, we're going to figure out the magical Ajax or server-side thing that says, trust them, it's all right. Allow the web API to do cross-origin. This is what I want you to do. There is a list of APIs in JSON. There is no user interface for this application, but it is a fully featured application. Actually, I take that back. There is an interface. It's right there. That's all. Express is a component in Node.js that is a very simple web server. That's all it is. So that's the default page that I didn't change. You're not going to use that at all. What you're going to use is all JavaScript, all JSON. So you're going to talk to it with tally is a get right here to list current overall voting results. APIs lists, give me all of the available APIs. You can do that with Postman or you can do it, so if we want to say get APIs, get trying to slow down. I know Richmond's kind of, what's he doing? You know, so it's not your fault, it's my fault. Here we go. So I'm going to copy this URL. I'm going to go to Postman, and I'm going to paste it into the get. This is your little URL, APIs. And I'm going to send, and it's going to show me the results down here. And it makes it nice and pretty for us. So this is how, you don't have to use it, but you can. You can use your browser. You can write jQuery code. The point is, you need to interact with this public API, and I've given you the API specification here. Wow. We'll add that in a minute. That's just a little bit more JavaScript code that I've got to do on the server side, say allow whomever. But APIs, that's just to get your GitHub username here. So mine is Tahbazeh vote. So if I do that, it's going to give me back JSON. What type of JSON did I get back here? What is that? It's an object. It starts with a curly brace. It's got two properties, success and message. And this second property is what? It's an object. It's a nested object. And this second object has two properties, API underscore name and voter underscore username. Okay? So the challenge is this. Go write some $.ajax code, and I'm going to put this out there. Actually, I'll publish it to that other repo, and I'll put it in the announcements. In order to vote, you need to post. You need to post your GitHub username and then just the word vote. Okay? What is the specification for the vote? It is that. So you pass an object. I'm going to put this in Slack, so don't worry about it. It's like you're going to see, here are the things that you need to do. So let's break for lunch for a few minutes. I'm going to put the description of the challenge into Slack, and after lunch continue for about half an hour, and then we'll get back together. the objective overall, vote for which API you want to cover together in class tomorrow.